capacity building of CBOs, and there's really a widespread impression that there's been very little progress towards abandonment of FGM amongst these communities. However, that impression is based on an over reliance on measuring prevalence, which really is misleading and masks the nature and the extent of the change that's taking place. And change is happening. Um, Over the past 18 months, we've been engaged in a process of reviewing the evidence and engaging in dialogue with key stakeholders, and really trying to identify the kind of change that's happening, the evidence of that change, the kinds of initiatives which are resulting in change, and where the current gaps are in the knowledge, specifically to the Somali ethnic communities in the Horn of Africa. And so today, Orchid Project is launching the results of this collaborative work. The story is far more positive than you might be expecting, and we hope that these resources that we share will support further change towards abandonment of all types of FGM amongst Somali communities in the Horn of Africa. And as head of research, I haven't been directly involved in this work, but really want to hand over to the team who have, specifically Shannon, who's research manager at Orchid Project, and Katie, who has journeyed long with us and long with the community in the Horn of Africa, and have them talk briefly about the process and the resources, and then we will have a time to hear directly from a panel of researchers and practitioners who have been part of the consultative process. And then they will share how they intend to use those resources in the future, in their future work to end FGM. And then there'll be an opportunity to get to your questions. So I want to hand over to Shannon and let her take it from here because she really has been leading on this. Shannon, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for that welcome and introduction, and welcome to everyone here. We are going to start off with talking about the process that we've been using over the last 18 months around knowledge sharing dialogues. So I'll hand over to Katie, who's going to go through a presentation about that process. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Shannon. And Natalie, can we have the next slide, please? I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes about the process that we've been through, and then Shannon's going to take us on with the resources that have been developed. So as Sean said, the available statistics on FGMC among Somali ethnic communities in the region is very high. We've got some figures here of 90s plus right across the region. However, we all know, those of us who've been working in this region, that a lot is happening, a lot is changing. There's this story of stagnation, of nothing happening, but actually we need to look more closely. We need to recognize the changes that are happening. So our knowledge sharing process, next slide, please, has been a process of inclusive knowledge sharing. So Shannon and I, working together, coordinating this, we wanted to see ourselves as guiding the process, but that the knowledge was coming from people in the region, from the region. And really what we were doing was collating knowledge that was coming from other people. So we were bringing together regional practitioners, activists, academics, policymakers, and wanting to have some dialogue which was non-judgmental so that we really hear what's being said. Next slide, please. Our process was we established an advisory board taken from across the region. And then we produced an initial briefing paper. Now, that initial briefing paper was based on what we knew already from orchid studies and orchid research, and also 28 too many, and some of what was published as well. So we drew together, advised by the advisory board, and we had a first paper. That then went out to what we call open dialogue fora. So everything was online, but we had one with researchers, one with practitioners, CBOs and NGO representatives, and a third one with activists, government representative and policymakers. Because we wanted to hear these different voices. We wanted to hear what they thought were the key and important issues. And also we wanted them to be telling us, are we reflecting the region appropriately? Have we picked the right issues? And what else is there going on, which might be in the grey literature rather than the published literature, evaluation reports or experiences from practitioners? So we've had a long process of listening to people, changing our minds on things, being challenged, which has been fantastic, and asking people to give feedback on the draft report. From that, then we moved on and we developed a much more collaborative position paper. And that again went out for further open critique, which was extending our evidence base out, questioning and challenging, and Shannon will be going through the resources that were developed from that. Next slide, please. So we then ended up with a resource, and that's what we've been doing the last few months. We've been developing the resources. We started with the idea that we would have one key resource, but that quickly we realized that we needed more than one for different audiences at different and different purposes, and written in different styles as well. And this was very much coming out from the feedback from the advisory body, the feedback from the people on these different fora. We've had more than 50, that's 50 people feeding into this process, critiquing what we're saying, what we're doing, and suggesting different ways of thinking about this. There's been a very strong focus on evidence-based. What is the evidence base of what is working in the Horn of Africa amongst Somali ethnic communities? And also, what is it that's brought about this change? And just as importantly, what has not worked? What has not helped? Because it's just as important to shift away from those approaches which aren't appropriate for this context, and to be focusing on those which we've got evidence that they are bringing about change. So it's been a process of drafting and reviewing and revising and reviewing and revising, and now we are delighted to be in this position today. And just a final mention that the process of translation, so the Accelerating Change Resource Pack, has been translated into Somali. It's Somali with a number of different voices in there, which we're delighted about. And also it's been back through a process with a key advisory board member to say, have we got this right in terms of the terminology that we are using when we talk about FGM and where this is translated? And we may hear more about that later on. So that's been our process. And we very much feel that it has been an inclusive knowledge production, and that we are delighted to be sharing these varied voices in the material. So on that note, I will hand over to Shannon, who will take us forward with what these resources are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate your summary of that process and The process really was critical to the development of all of the resources that we are launching here today. And just to make mention that we have created a summary, a written summary of that knowledge sharing dialogues process. So you can find that on our website along with all of the other resources that we're launching today. All of the resources are available on the FGMC Research Initiative website. That's www.fgmcri.org. And you can find those on our landing page. You can find them on the regional page for Horn of Africa, and all of them are placed there together. So as Katie has said, there are three core resources that we're launching today. All of them framed around FGMC in the Horn of Africa, and all of them having emerged from this knowledge sharing dialogues process. The first one is called Signs of Change. This is the foundational paper that Katie referenced that we, in terms of what evidence is available, and that was looking at gray literature as well as published literature, and was revised after the dialogues. There's also the Accelerating Change, which is a practitioner resource. That one is available in both English and Somali. And then we have the Evidence of Change, which is around the research gaps and the research priorities for the region. So I have the privilege of going through what is in those resources, and I will do my best to give you a summary of each of them. Hopefully that will give you a taste for them, but you can go and dive into more detail with all of the resources on our website. They're all available there. Natalie, can you move to the next slide? Thanks. So this is the Signs of Change paper. As Katie mentioned, this was co-developed by Orchid Project and the advisory board. So bringing in a number of voices in its first iteration. At first, it sought to highlight areas where change was happening, but also to look at what was both supporting and hindering different interventions. And it set the foundation for these dialogues that we then had with practitioners, with academics, with researchers, with policymakers and advocates. And then a revised version of the paper is what's available now, reflecting what came out of those discussions. Next slide. So the key messages from this resource are, as has been mentioned by both Sean and Katie, that change is happening. The real goal of this knowledge sharing dialogues process was to kind of get below the prevalence line. We've all seen that line, that kind of horizontal line for this region, and showing a kind of continuous prevalence. However, a lot of that data being outdated and really needing to improve on understanding what's going on below that and what other kinds of changes can we look at. So a number of changes are outlined in the resource, but just to pick up on a couple of them. The first is a real shift in willingness to engage in dialogue around FGMC. For those who've been involved in FGMC work in this region for a long time, you'll remember way back that there was difficult to even have conversations, where now there is an openness and a willingness to engage in dialogue with religious leaders, with men participating in those dialogues. And that's a real shift in what's happening around this issue. Also, a strong awareness of health risks and health consequences of FGMC, and a change in type of cutting, moving away from a pharaonic or type 3 or infibulation cut towards other types of cutting. So some of the changes that are happening are outlined in that resource. And then looking at where there's evidence of particular interventions. And I just wanted to pick up on a few, although there's others that are mentioned in the resource. One of them is an increased use of non-judgmental open dialogue, really creating spaces where people can have conversations and without judgment share their views and rethink some of their perspectives and beliefs around FGMC. Also seeing a lot of impact where FGMC is integrated with other issues. So looking at sexual and reproductive health and rights, looking at economic empowerment and self-help groups, and how FGMC is integrated within those other issues. as well as training of health workers on person-centered communication, which was put out by the WHO, but a way of opening up space for health workers to have conversations around this issue with women and girls. In this paper, it also reflects on some of the decision-making dilemmas that are challenging within this context. And those exist at the household level, the professional level, and the national level, and really sit as what I would think of as kind of tensions. At the household level, family who want to protect their daughter from the health consequences of FGMC, but also want to protect her social inclusion within the community, want to protect her ability to marry, or want to protect her economic prospects for the future, and how they sit within that tension to make decisions about what they will do around this practice can be a real challenge. At a professional level, that would often means health workers, and this is a growing trend towards medicalization, and health workers having seen some of the severe health consequences of FGMC in this region, particularly with the most severe type of cut being practiced. And so attention for health workers in how to manage a drive towards medicalization, while also wanting to counsel towards abandonment, and wanting to protect, obviously, the health and well-being of women and girls within that. And at the national level, where there is movement towards eradication of infibulation and type 3 or pharaonic cutting, particularly by religious leaders who have issued fatwas towards those ends. However, at wanting to pass policy and legislation that aligns with international commitments to zero tolerance. And again, the tension and decision-making around how to move forward in terms of policy and legislation frameworks within that context. And then it outlines some of the context-specific challenges that are that emerge within the Horn of Africa. One of them being the definition of FGMC. So in many spaces, FGMC being understood as infibulation. And so some households might say we've abandoned FGM because we've abandoned the infibulation or the type 3 cut. And so what does it mean to define FGMC as all types of cutting, and how do activists and practitioners integrate that messaging within their work? Challenges with health consequences campaigning versus integration and human rights framing. So I think a real shift towards that in more recent campaigns. But the unintended consequence can often be a move towards medicalization with the health consequences campaigning. So seeing shifts in how practitioners are addressing these issues and some of the challenges that emerge towards abandonment. Next slide, Natalie. So the second resource is a practitioner resource around accelerating change. So this builds on the Signs of Change resource to really look at how can we move forward with the changes that are happening, with the progress that has been made, and potentially catalyze or accelerate that change. As I mentioned earlier, this resource is available in both English and Somali. And a quick shout out to Amal, who did a thorough check of all of the Somali translation to make sure that it was aligned with the way that we wanted things framed. So we hope that that resource is of value and communicates in the way that we had wanted it to. So within this resource, it's framed around the 6 elements of abandonment that UNICEF have developed. And I'll go through those elements, but 3 of the 6 have had quite significant focus, a lot of work around 3 of them. And the latter 3 have not seen as much or have not had as much attention and could potentially be used to accelerate change within the region. Next slide. So the 3 that have received the most attention of the 6 is non-judgmental open dialogue, which I mentioned earlier in the Signs of Change resource. This is, as it sounds, a non-judgmental space for open dialogue around the issue, and often integrated with other topics and other dialogues that people are having within communities. a shift towards more human rights framing and a shift away from a health consequences campaign. I think seeing more and more of that, an example being SOFHA's work with health workers who are using the person-centered communication to try to give that human rights framing to FGMC advocacy and counseling, as well as collective choice, where people really come together, and this often emerges out of dialogues, but where people come together to make a choice towards change and a change towards abandonment. An example of that is IFRA Foundation have the Dear Daughter campaign, and I heard just yesterday that they have 100,000 women who have pledged commitments to not have their daughters cut. So kind of collective spaces and campaigns that people can join towards change and towards abandonment. Next slide. And the latter three, where there is potential to really kind of move forward with accelerating change, are community exchange, enabling environment, and enough people see change. Enabling environment, there have been some really positive shifts, even recently, around policy and legislative frameworks at state level, where we're seeing zero tolerance bills being passed, as well as an anti-FGM policy in Somaliland that was passed just last year. But a real focus on this area and advocating around legislative and policy frameworks that work for the context and work for communities within the Horn of Africa is an important piece to be able to catalyze and unlock some of that change. Community exchange is this exchange of experiences between communities, and this can be between communities in one particular country or across borders. And there have been examples of this, and an opportunity to really kind of move forward is for communities to see what other communities are doing, and for other practitioners to engage in peer-to-peer learning with other practitioners, activists to join together, to really kind of create those bridges across boundaries and across borders. And the last one that really we want to emphasize and have emphasized within the resource is enough people see change. And this one is a challenge within this context where the dominant narrative is that their change is not happening because we see the prevalence line coming out of the demographic health surveys staying the same. But that there are these changes that are happening. There are individual stories, there are community stories, there are organizations that are seeing impact, and having these spaces and opportunities for those to be shared so that others can see them and witness them provides an opportunity to really move forward with change. Next slide, Natalie. And the last resource, I am coming to the end, the last resource is around the evidence of change. And this one was developed in consultation with academics, researchers, and practitioners who are involved in the process of building evidence. And this is coming from the Orchid Project research team. It's one of our key interests is being able to build a body of evidence of what's working and to be able to create spaces to share that evidence. And what we are aware of is that change involves very small steps. And the final kind of significant behavioral change of abandonment usually is preceded by a number of different changes of knowledge and attitudes. So if we can measure and identify those steps, we can map the kind of pathways of change that are happening and build on those to work towards greater change. Next slide. So some of the recommendations coming out of that resource are around research gaps and research priorities. I'll just pull out a few of these, but you can use the resource to see those in more detail. But the first is that we need recognition of the variation among Somali ethnic communities within the Horn of Africa. That although there are similarities, there are also differences. And understanding those differences and how that influences change is important within research. accurate data on prevalence and types. We have a lot of out-of-date data. We have a lot of data that sits only at a national level and really need to fill in the gaps at the subnational levels and look at more nuance around indicators of change and types of FGMC. And doing that through longitudinal studies so we can really understand what's going on over time. And then there are a number of different issues that are helpful to have better understanding of within this context. How to engage with religious leaders and religious ideas, how to engage with men, how to understand the complexities of medicalization, as well as legal and policy frameworks and how those work within this space. The one final point is just this intersection of research, evaluation, and programming, and really needing to create spaces where community-based organizations can share the evidence that they have developed about their own work, so that there is an opportunity to see what is working, to have peer-to-peer learning, and to build on what's already there. And then as needed to strengthen the research capacity of those organizations to continue to produce robust evaluations and build that evidence base, and provide that in some sort of documented form so that we can see what is working, how can we build, and how do we move forward. So I've spoken for a long time. I hope that's given you a good introduction to the resources, and I do hope that you will go to our website and find those and explore them yourself. I want to stop talking because I would really like to allow enough time for our panel to share their thoughts on these resources and this process. So I will hand over to Katie, who is going to facilitate our panel discussion, and I just want to welcome all of our panelists. Thank you so much. Katie, I think you're still...
Thank you. It's great to have an overview of the resources, and I encourage everyone to go away and have a look at those as well. We have got a really interesting and varied panel of 4 people, all of whom have contributed significantly to the development of these materials and have engaged in some superb, honest, and challenging conversations, and we're grateful for that. We have, very briefly, we have Rukio Omar from Belt of Somali Women. We have Amal Ahmed from SOFHA in Somaliland. We have Yasir from Silver Lining, Kenya. And we also have Mohamed from Rescomade in Kenya. So if our panel would like to turn their cameras on, that would be wonderful, and we can see you all as we go forward. The first question, there's 3 questions, and we're going to give a chance for each of our 4 panelists to tell us a little bit about this as we go. And our first question is about the process, this knowledge sharing dialogue process. So I want to ask our panelists, what do you see as the value of sharing knowledge in this way? And what was your key learning point from being involved in this knowledge sharing dialogue process? And I'd like to ask Amal first, and then we'll move over to Rukio second. Amal.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Shannon and Sean. It's wonderful to be here. As Katie said, my name is Amal Ahmed. I'm the ED of SOFHA, Somaliland Family Health Association. And we've been working in FGM, in the FGM space, working on FGM since the creation of our organization in 2009. It's deeply embedded in our work. And we broadly work in sexual reproductive health and rights. We're a member association of the IPPF. And so a key aspect of our work is FGM always. The process has been fantastic. I've been fortunate enough to be involved in the Orchid Project for a few years. And the process of sharing information, of asking questions of evidence, what's working, what's not working, how do we know, has been wonderful. It's been a great learning experience for myself. And it's something that our organization really values. This, in the development of this resource, I learned a lot from other practitioners in other regions of Somali communities, because Somali communities occupy such a large space. I've learned that the dynamics between the community and the legal process, for instance, varies from space to space. And where Somalis might be a majority or a minority, that can have an effect. And it's been a wonderful learning experience of sharing information from different perspectives. So not just as a provider of health services, but then to look deeply at those who are engaged in research and those who are also more engaged in advocacy. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Amal. Thank you. And Rukio, your thoughts here on the process?
Thank you so much, Kate. I echo Amal, and I would like to send my big thanks to Team Orchid for really facilitating this participatory research. One of the things that I really appreciated about being part of this development of the resource is really the co-creation part. And I think from every step, the whole journey has been so insightful, and also meeting the different participants and really focused on the work that they do on the ground. I'm based in the Netherlands, so my optic view was more from the diaspora community, and really engaging in those conversations was so much insightful, and it was a very valuable journey to really see that of all the sessions that we had with you and Shannon and Sean, this is the result of it. So we are really, me personally, I'm very proud of how it came all together. And yeah, that's
Thanks,
it.
Rukio. Thank you. And Mohamed, your thoughts on the process?
Thanks, Katie. Great work, and thanks for putting together all the documents, resources. In terms of the process, what we did was really great, and the resources can be used in terms of collective reflection. It provides an opportunity to get the perspectives from different stakeholders like researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and advocates who can be able to contribute to these resources, which can be used to understand the current patterns, shifts that were happening, and the emerging successes, which have not been well documented, that may not be visible. So, which can be able to help for those who are planning to start programs, or those who are implementing projects now, to use these resources to interact with them, and in terms of improving their programs, improve so that they use the local evidence that are available. Secondly, the resources highlight the community-led changes that are happening within the Somali context. Sharing this will foster recognition from the local efforts and help move away from the top-down narratives in terms of what was being implemented, making the current evidence to be understood by all the stakeholders within the Somali community. Thirdly, the process can also bridge the gap between research and practice. The dialogues we had really acted, to bridge the gaps between those who are doing implementers, we as the researchers, and then those who are in terms of policy. Gathering all those feedbacks and putting them into document can be good for policymakers within the Somali context, as well as program implementers. And then the use of concrete examples, which you have shared, Katie, of what is working and why they're working, might be able to equip better participants to adapt strategies, scale up feature interventions, as well as explore new pathways for impacts in their respective contexts. Thanks.
Thank you, Mohamed. Very comprehensive answer there. And Yasir, I don't know if you can pop your camera on.
Yeah.
Can we see you? So
Uh,
perhaps you can tell us
uh,
about the process, and also perhaps, Yasir,
yeah.
if you can move from the process, tell us also about how you plan to utilize, how are you going to use these resources, and what changes are you expecting out of that? Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Katie. And I'm in a very remote area, and my network isn't
That's
that
okay,
much
that's
strong.
fine.
So I mean, yeah, and we are doing the mother and child FGM dialogues with the mothers and the child. So it's a very remote area, and the network is fluctuating a lot. So bear in mind. Thank you. So for the process, and the knowledge sharing workshop process has been immensely valuable in fostering an understanding of FGM among the Somali communities across the Horn of Africa. And for me, the process has shifted the focus from simplistic metrics like prevalence to a more meaningful indicators such as shifts in attitude, changes in types, the type of cat, and also increased openness to dialogues. Another thing is by bringing the practitioners, activists, community leaders together. This process has built trust and mutual understanding among each other. On utilization, and for me, I plan to utilize this resource by incorporating them into the staff training, also community sensation materials, and also strategy development for FGM programming. So yeah, that is in terms of utilization. Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And we're very glad the network is good enough that we can hear you here. Let me move on to Rukio in terms of how are you going to use these resources, and then we'll come on to Amal after that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. As Belt of Somali Women, we're a platform for collective action and really creating those spaces for our members to come together and really focus on what is the step forward and the capacity building. And I think this tool can really support our members, but it can also help us to really strategize in what else is needed. We actually have an event coming up on 5th of May in Nairobi, where some of our members will also be present. And then we can introduce these tools to them and see how they can use it to really advance the work that they do and have that impact. What I really loved about the resource tool is also the guiding questions and the self-assessment tools. Those are things that can really support in the work that we do as Belt to really focus on what else is needed and how can we really focus on that capacity of our members, but also as the activists in what they need. So it's something that we're going to be using very soon. Let me put it that way.
Excellent. Thanks, Rukio. And I love the mention of the self-assessment tools. Go and have a look, everybody, and see what we've got in there. Amal, how about you? How are you and SOFHA going to be using these resources?
We're going to be using it right away. We're going to use it to refresh our trainings. We have new staff members. We have young people that have joined our team. So we're going to be doing retrainings and really refreshing our material based on the resource. And then beyond that, just like Yasir said, we're going to be taking it into the community and putting it into practice. We're also, because we engage in capacity building training for other community organizations, we will be using it in that regard. Back in 2021, we developed an FGM supplementary curriculum, and we will be revising that curriculum based on the resource. And then also the research component. is huge. So this gives us more encouragement and lines of inquiry that we can pursue to generate more local data to feed into this body of evidence. So we're going to be using it as a living tool, and we want to be producing more of the data that's needed to reflect the change that's happening in our communities.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Mohamed, moving on to you, do you have plans of how you might be intending to use these resources? You're mute at the moment.
Sure, Katie. As a researcher perspective, I think the resources are valuable as an asset for enriching both designs of feature studies as well as dissemination of feature studies, because they provide invaluable evidence as well as what works and what not works. So the first thing is maybe framing questions, because most of what is currently happening or what has happened has been captured in this document. So we need to think of what better ways or better questions to be framed for future researches, as well as strengthening the literature reviews that we will be going through when we are doing our proposal development. We'll be using these resources as a reference resource, as well as supporting participatory research approaches that emphasize local voices and thanks for maybe a positive transformation, which will reinforce the importance of involving researchers going forward, so that the inputs of the communities as well as policymakers are taken into account. So the resources will really help us in terms of undertaking future resources that can have impactful meaning based on what has currently been provided by these resources.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. There was mention of the 6 elements of abandonment. Are there, would any of you like to make any comments about any of those that you're either using now or you're going to be using or in the future?
Katie, I can make comment on that. And for me, or for us, for an organization, the emphasis on UNICEF's 6 elements of abandonment provides a clear practical framework to strengthen our approach, especially around non-judgmental dialogues and human rights, and also enabling environments. Yeah.
Say a little more.
Yeah, sorry.
Do say a little more about how you're going to use the resource for say enabling environment.
Yeah, by for example, the dialogues, and when we are having dialogues, the dialogues will be as open as possible and engaging everyone around the community. For example, the religious leaders, the elders, and also the women, having an open dialogue so that everyone can say whatever he wants or she wants, and making it as open and as non-judgmental as possible. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yasir. Rukio any thoughts there around the 6 elements?
I think if we focus on if I look at the tool from the I think for us, it's really important to focus a lot on that. As a platform, we already create those spaces where different people can come together. So that community exchange, I think, is really important. Really focusing on the different voices. I think the voices that we hear from the diaspora community within the Somali communities is, of course, on a different scale than we would see in the country itself. So having those different actors coming together and exchanging those the work that they do, but also their storytelling, I think it's really important. In the webinar that we organized yesterday, you could see how different regions can come together, but also reinforce certain terminologies that we use. Simple fact is if we use we need to stop the pharaonic circumcisions, for example, it should be a zero tolerance. So exchanging those ideas is really important, but also enabling environment. I think that is the key for us to see, okay, even from the diaspora community, there's a huge shift happening. How can we really get those influence and create a space where also youth activists and young women can come together and hear from other survivors as well, and how they have overcome those challenges and how they are doing the work now. So creating an environment where really it's safe for to show the work that you do in FGM, but also share your story as a survivor.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you. And Amal, anything you'd like to add there?
Yes, all the elements give us an opportunity to really accelerate our work, to scale it, to do more. But what particularly comes to mind is enough people see change, because we see change on a daily basis. We see attitude shifts among our staff. When our staff come on board, they're part of the community. They have the same attitudes around the practice, and we see them going through the steps of change. We are not going to reject them. We're not going to be judgmental, right off the bat. No, we're going to embrace them, and we're going to bring them into the fold. And so enough people see change. We see it among our clients in the clinics. We have so many stories of people coming into the clinic. They are dead set on cutting their daughters, and we engage them in dialogue. We make sure that we establish that relationship, that they keep coming back to us, and so that we can move away from that. Sometimes it results in them doing a lesser cut, and sometimes, many times, it results in them abandoning the practice altogether. So we need to make sure that these people that have made these decisions can come together, can, as Rukio said, share their stories, the hardships that they face in getting to that point, but also so that others can see that it's possible. It is possible. We have the link with diaspora. We have a lot of people coming back. They are not practicing. They have cousins and aunts and communities. There's an opportunity for us to create spaces where, like, oh, so it's not as, I didn't think that so many people were leaving the practice. Yes, a lot of people are leaving the practice. A lot of girls that have never been cut are getting married and having kids and are having perfectly respectable lives, of course. And so we see an opportunity there to bring that to light. But all the elements provide an opportunity where we can do more work.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. You're right back to our initial message, which is there is change happening. It's not a stagnant situation. Let's share it and let's shout about it. Great. We have one more question. I'm going to kick off with Mohamed first. Here, what do you see as being the next steps, the next critical steps for accelerating the change in the Horn of Africa within programming, policy, or research? So maybe for yourselves or wider, what are your next steps? You're muted, Mohamed.
Sorry. Thanks, Katie. Great question. I think to truly accelerate the change in the Horn of Africa, I think we need to move beyond awareness creation towards more sustained, coordinated, and community as well as family centric or centered action. In terms of the programming, everything requires long-term investment, especially not only to depend on donors, but government as well as state governments within the Somali context or in Kenya, where we are, the counties should also be able to invest in these kind of programs, because some of them have developed action plans to eliminate FGMC within their context. But now the funds is the main issue. So long-term investment, and then integrate the work of FGMC into the wider health, education, legal system, as well as protection system, so that all those stakeholders are aware of the current evidence, and which, these resources can be used or can be shared with them, so that they are aware of what is happening within their context, so that they don't only focus on the prevalence and know the changes that are happening, which they can support with the minimal kind of resources that they have. In terms of policy, maybe strengthening the implementation and accountability mechanism. For example, in Kenya, we have laws, but some of these laws are not, implemented directly within the context where this practice is currently happening, especially within the Somali community. So maybe strengthening the capacity of the legal personnel within the Somali system, so that they are aware of the current laws, the evidence that exist, and what they are supposed to do will also help that moving forward. In terms of research, I think we need more of operational research and implementation research, so that researches are not only conducted like cross-sectional, but we need research that go along with program implementation, so that lessons are learned, and then those lessons learned can be improved to make changes in terms of program implementation or future program investment. I think that I have that. Maybe if you have any other question, Katie, let me know.
Thank you. That's great, and there'll be more questions to come, I'm sure, in a minute. Yasir, what about you and the next step? And then I'll come on to Rukio afterwards.
Yeah, for us as silver lining, the next critical steps for us is promoting the enabling environment by aligning government ministries and CSOs, NGOs, community-based organizations, and religious institutions to actively support the abandonment efforts. And this includes legal reforms, curriculum development, and clear policy guidelines. And for example, in Garissa, we have an anti-FGM policy that is in progress, and it's in the county assembly. And in a few time, in some time, it will be into practice. So this is what we have been working with the CSOs in Garissa County, with the county government, the national government have come together to create an anti-FGM policy framework. And another critical step is strengthening community exchange programs. This is done by facilitating dialogues between communities that are in different stages of the change, learning from peers, especially across borders. And this can help normalize alternative narratives. So there's this community that are doing this way, that have come from this practice, and learning from another community and changing narrative and all that. And another is document and sharing positive stories of change. And as noted in the resource, change is happening, but often goes unnoticed. So amplifying these stories can shift perceptions and encourage others to join the movement. And the last critical step for us is to develop a Somali-specific indicators of change. For example, moving beyond prevalence to measuring shifts in attitude, intentions, and intermediate behaviors will provide more meaningful insights and guidelines and guide to adaptive programming. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Lots of very practical points in there. And I noticed that you said quite a bit about a community exchange, which there was a question posed by Nada Al-Assad on community exchange. Great to hear that that's come in there as well. So I'm going to ask Rukio and Amal to be quite brief with your answers here, and then we are then going to go into the Q&A section, so you'll have a chance to talk again. Rukio, next step.
Yeah, things that I would like to add, Katie, is really investing in collaborative action, allowing different organizations to really work together. As Amal also mentioned, the diaspora community is huge in the Horn of Africa. So creating bridges, building those bridges across borders and across Somali organization is really important when it comes to the funding, but also allowing survivor-led leadership when it comes to designing those programs and the policies. I think it's important. So I'll keep it very short, Katie.
Great point, but very well made. Thank you. Amal, your final thoughts here?
Yes, I'll pick up what Rukio said about building those bridges, because it'll be important for not only this advisory board but all the people that took part in this work. We will have to find ways to continue these relationships that we have established. I think we can help each other. And I think we must keep those relationships. I'll just stress the issue of integration, what we see as really important, because we talked about, yes, we can talk about FGM now, but there's a risk that there might be fatigue among communities and among practitioners if they're standalone projects, because there's so much need and so many issues. It's really important to integrate FGM into everything, especially all the issues around human rights issues. In Somaliland, for instance, family law hasn't been passed. That has huge effects on families. The sexual offenses bill is pending somewhere. So it's critical for us going forward to integrate these things, because they're linked so much. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I know we could explore more of those going forward, but I'm going to hand over now to Shannon, and we're going to continue with our same fantastic panel, but this time addressing questions that have been posed by the rest of you as participants. So thank you, panel. I'll take a back seat now, but you're still in the limelight with Shannon facilitating. Over to you, Shannon.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for facilitating that session, and thank you, panelists, for your responses and dialogue. I had my camera off, but I was smiling the whole time. It felt like there were so many responses, and I was like, yes, this is great. And I think there's just so many practical uses for the resources, key next steps of where we go from here, and reflections on the knowledge sharing dialogues process as well, which I really valued. We do have a few questions that have come through. Some of them I think we can join together to pose to you. One of them I think that you've picked up on already, the one about community exchange. But to the person who asked that question, if you would like more, please post that back into the Q&A or the chat. One of them is around the development of these resources. So asking how specific cultural, social, and religious dynamics within the region were taken into account within the development of the resources. And as well, a kind of piece around, were there any young activists or youth organizations who were part of this? I'll throw that open to anybody who wants to jump in, particularly around this piece of how the different dynamics of culture and social and religious within the Horn of Africa were taken into consideration in the resources. And I can also speak to that if you'd like. I don't know if there's anybody who wants to pick up that question.
Amal's hand is up.
Please, Amal, just come in. You're welcome.
Okay, so maybe I can just jump in. In the development of the resources, we looked at all the different elements, all the different stakeholders. What roles do religious leaders play in the work on FGM? Have there been fatwas? what was the reaction, what are the beliefs around the practice among communities and among different sectors of communities. So it's been present throughout the discussion, not only in just talking about it, but also in looking in documents that are available that are talking about it. Because it's a key thing. So it's included throughout. That's what I would say to the question. It's embedded into the formation of the resources. And the issue around one of the elements looking at human rights talks about that directly, because we use that in our work. We're talking about human rights and we're talking about Islamic practice. And actually something that has been key in our work with communities is using the voice of a prominent sheikh in our community who's talking, and he didn't make this video for us. This was just out there. And we use it, where he talks about children's rights in Islam. And he talks about what that means in regards to FGM. So we didn't target this sheikh. We didn't go after him. This information was already out there, but he was talking about it. And we found that to be a powerful tool because it talks about children are trust, and parents can't do whatever they want to children. You know, they're going to be accountable. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you so much, Amal. Does anyone else want to pick up on that question or add to the thoughts around the engagement of youth and what the potential is for engaging youth with use of these resources as we go forward? Yasir, as part of Yank, I don't know if that's a question that you could pick up on.
Yeah, sorry. And in regards to engaging youth and for example, in the fight against FGM, are very important in this fight. And for us, as for example, taken out of context, for example, in Garissa County, we have various youth. We have come together, and we have this way of using art to show the effects of FGM. For the youth, like for example, the youth like things that are very colorful and attractive, and they engage more. So for us, we have come to an idea where we are using art in the fight against FGM. So that's also a step that we have gone on with. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for those reflections. Yeah, I know you've done a lot of work engaging youth in different ways and in different forums. So I think that these resources can be integrated into existing work with youth networks. They can be shared and picked up into those spaces, a really critical part of the fight. It's also a question, I don't know if someone can respond to this, but it's about the FGM policy that was recently passed in Somaliland. Recognizing that it was passed very recently, the question is what impact, if any, has there been from that? I don't know if anyone wants to pick up on that question and give some reflections.
Unless someone else wants to chime in, I'll be brief. So the policy was passed in September, and we can't really say that there's been significant change in practice. I mean, when we're looking at what we're dealing with, but it's a significant positioning that can be used. It was with the last government. It did come just before the elections, and now we have a new government in place. But it's another tool in the toolbox that we can use. So the next step is, okay, we have this policy now. Can we take it to Parliament? Can it now be turned into a bill? So these frameworks are important, but they have to be done along with the community engagement to have real impact.
Absolutely. Making them practical and accessible and making use of them. There are a number of reflections in the chat around kind of echoing the need to engage youth. Also, a number of comments saying, although change is happening, we can't ignore that prevalence is remaining high. And picking up on this point around medicalization and the shift towards medicalization, there is a need to push towards awareness of that, but also a question of, is medicalization a step towards abandonment? And is that something that can be used in the process or the pathway of change? That's a big question, a little bit controversial. So I don't know if anybody wants to take that one on, or just give some reflections on the trend in medicalization within the Horn of Africa.
If I can add, if I can answer this question from my own experience, I think number one, if we go back to this resource tool, it's a difficult question to ask because it's really important to really understand, okay, how does the community look like where I find myself, and I want to really focus on the fight against FGM. And this tool helps you to really understand, okay, how does my environment look like? What am I doing as an organization? And what are the changes that I'm seeing within my community? And how can I build on? If you are in an extremely rural area, of course, the medicalization of it can prevent extreme consequences for the health of a young girl. So I think these conversations are really important to keep them within the context. From Belt of Somali Women, we always advocate for zero tolerance because zero tolerance when it comes to FGM. However, having those harsh approach and very firm approach towards FGM can really create resistance within the community that you are doing the work that you're doing. So I think this tool helped us to really focus on grassroots organizations. Okay, how is the work that I'm doing and what changes am I seeing and what changes can I continue building on? Because it's a ladder that you keep climbing to really have that long-lasting impact and go for complete eradication of FGM within your community.
I think that's a really important point to pick up on context and what medicalization looks like, what practices are happening, what the beliefs are around it, and to really respond within those contextual realities.
Yeah, Shannon, and
Yeah.
yeah, and I wanted to add on the issue of the prevalence rate being high and nothing changed. As for the resource has talked about it in a well manner. And for example, impact is seen in, for example, in increased community engagement, stronger advocacy messaging, and also better tracking of nuanced progress, such as, for example, moving away from the pharaonic cutting to a less severe cutting. For me, that is a transitional step towards abandonment. And rather than just checking the prevalence rate being high and saying that nothing is happening, it's better to, look at the shifts, for example, in attitudes and people being more willing to dialogues and more willing to engage in these matters as compared to before when we went to the community, they were more, more hostile and they were not welcoming to those ideas. But now I think things have changed, and that's attitude is everything, and that's helping a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. There is also another question about the 3 elements that have received less focus. Although there has been work on each of these, they were presented in the practitioner resources potentials for moving forward. So that's the community exchange, the enabling environment, and enough people see change. There's a question about what do you as the panel see as the barriers to these 3 being taken up compared to the others? They are each a bit unique, so there might be reflections on enabling environment or enough people see change or one of those. But what do you see as some of the reasons that those have had less focus within work?
Shannon, if we look at the Horn of Africa in different regions in Somaliland and in Somalia specifically, you see there hasn't been an enabling environment because there are no legislations that are in place. We're still at a baby phase, you can say, when it comes to national policies on FGM. So it has the focus has been a lot on collective action, where you see survivor voices across the diaspora really focusing on collective action, really taking the step away from this practice. But also, in order for us, I think if you look at different regions and the work that they do, you do see those other elements also appearing in different regions, considering which phase are they in the abandonment. And if we look at government level, there hasn't been, I think it's important to safeguard the safety and protection of not only the survivors, but also the organizations that are doing the work. You really don't want to be targeted as a grassroots organization, for example, in Somalia, that are doing the work on FGM, where you can really showcase the work that you do. Sometimes you get a lot of resistance, but also threats towards you as an organization. So we haven't been able, unfortunately, to focus on those three elements because we're still not there. And I think having organizations like SOFHA, the work that they do in Somaliland, it can be a bit different because Somaliland is progressing if you compare it to southwest region of Somalia. So, and yeah, hopefully in the future we can really work on those other elements.
Really helpful reflections. Thank you, Rukio. Amal, did you want to come in on that one as well?
Yeah, just something quick. No, I echo Ruqya's. It's something that needs a lot of work on many different fronts. And yeah, I think Ruqya said a lot on that. I just wanted to say something about the community exchange and why it might not have taken root as well as would have been wanted. I think it's because it has to happen in a natural way. So how are these communities coming together, and why are they coming together, and why are they talking about FGM? Because communities don't come together to talk about FGM. So if we need that to happen, then we need to think about, okay, can we facilitate a natural community exchange? And so I think we have to try a few different ways to facilitate that. So in the Somali context, we don't have those rites of passages for FGM. When communities are coming together, they're coming together for weddings or funerals, or there's political, things or clan things, and the agenda is always something else. So how can we, add, and, can we add FGM to the agenda? Maybe can we add FGM along with other things to the agenda? So we have to think about it. And I think that's why it's been maybe difficult for that to be established in Somali communities.
Thank you, Amal. Really helpful thoughts and reflections on where some of the challenges still are and how we can move forward with those. I can see quite a few questions in the chat, but also some responses to them. So I think there's a little bit of peer-to-peer responses that are going on there. So I don't think I'll bring those questions in unless there is anything else that anyone has that you want responded to by the panel. I think we can perhaps move on to our next, to our closing. But thank you. For those of you who are engaging in the chat, I'm so glad it's open and is creating a space for sharing some of those thoughts. Please continue to do that. and to share your thoughts there. Thank you to the panel for going through those questions and answers. I really appreciate it. I hope that they've responded to you in a way that makes sense to you and that they've responded to your questions. If you have further questions, please put them into the chat and we'll try to address them. So just wanting to think about where we go from here and to kind of pull together what we've been talking about today and some of the next steps. There are a lot of next steps, as you heard in the panel discussion, as has been going on in the chat. There's a lot of things to move forward with. So in terms of some of the things that Orchid Project are hoping to move forward with is to continue to create opportunities to share knowledge, to share evidence and research and experience on what is happening within the Horn of Africa and what is working to create change with Somali ethnic communities. And part of this is around new collaborative research partnerships. That's the space that we are coming from within the research team. But it's also translating and disseminating existing research to make it accessible and to improve that uptake within programming and within policy. It's about facilitating spaces, both virtual and in person, where they're possible for that knowledge sharing and continuing this dialogue. And we've been doing this process and it's come to this point of developing these resources, but we really don't want to see this as the end and a point where we stop talking to each other. In fact, to be honest, I really see it as the beginning. I think there's been a lot of really valuable dialogue, and I think there's a lot more that's needed to be able to bridge across spaces and experiences and to share knowledge with each other. And then where we can to document some of those best practices that can be used for program design and implementation, etc. So there are opportunities for you to be involved. There are opportunities to use the resources. They're freely available and you can use them, download them, share them. We really encourage you to do that as much as you can. And to where you need to adapt them to your own context and realities. They're not fixed, they're kind of living, iterative documents that have been produced through this process. And as Rukio raised before we started this webinar, I think we would really love to hear how you use them. So if you do end up using them, we would love your feedback on what works and what doesn't, how you've maybe seen some impact from them or ways that you've embedded them, so that we can continue to learn and to adapt those. We would like to host another dialogue session in June, bringing together practitioners, researchers, policymakers, etc. So we welcome you into that space. If you would like to participate in an upcoming dialogue, you can reach out. But also if you are interested in facilitating or co-facilitating that with us, I think for Orchid Project, we don't see ourselves as needing to be at the front face of this as it goes forward. I think it's been something that we have facilitated to this stage, but we would really like that to be a collaborative process going forward. So whether you would like to take the lead on facilitating that dialogue or co-facilitate it with us, I think that invitation is also there. So I will put contact details into the chat so that you can reach out for any of those opportunities and ways to be involved. The link is also up on that last slide for you to access those resources. Are there any comments from anyone, whether those who are here attending or from panelists before we close, that anyone would like to come in with? Maybe I'll hand over to you, Katie. I see your hand raised. If you'd like to come in with any comments.
Just one comment as we close, and maybe others as well. Really, that thought that back to our first message, which is change is happening, and in terms of going forward, let's share that positive change that's happening, and let's break that whole misunderstanding that things have stagnated across Somali communities and that things aren't changing. And we've talked about barriers, and so one of the barriers to enough people seeing change is that it's maybe very easy to get into social media or stories of disaster, stories of where things have gone wrong. But let's actually try and get more of those stories of positive change coming in. And I know that Natalie, as the communications person for Orchid, was saying, let's have some of these stories of positive change coming back in and out there in through all of our social media and communication. So excellent. There we are, Lottie, thank you. So change is happening, and let's have it shared much more wider than it has been before. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie. Thank you for emphasizing that. I think it's really important. Any closing comments from any of our phenomenal panel? Anything that you would like to add as we close?
I would just like to extend my thank you again for this really insightful journey that it has been, but also big thanks to and lucky enough to meet all these participants that are doing the work, Amal, Mohamed, and Yasir, and all the other ones that are not able to attend today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rukio. Thank you, Orchid Project. Thanks to all the attendees. Thank you very much.
Yeah.